Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Butterfly Effect podcast, and today we're going to be talking about part 2 of our Heavy Rain analysis, and we're kicking off with Norman Jayden, FBI Inspector. And you know what, because obviously we did see Scott Shelby at the end of the last one, who announced himself as a private detective, it's something that since I've been going back, mate, that I'm like, it didn't strike me as weird at the time, but when you think about it, it's kind of odd. And obviously knowing where the plot goes, it's kind of odd that we are playing as two detectives, as like two playable characters. I don't know if that ever come across to you at all.
Yeah, it is weird because it's like we're playing as two law representatives kind of thing. And you could argue maybe that is a little overkill, but like, I guess not. You know, one still works for them. He gets like all the cool fancy tech, like we get like an official FBI agent potentially treading on toes of cops, And then, we have like a retired person who's got the history, who's, kind of going more hands-on, not in the crime scenes. So I think they're different enough to kind of warrant being there. But I do agree it is a bit of a odd and bold choice from them.
Yeah, because I was sort of thinking to myself, like, even like, because it's a murder mystery, I almost wish that sort of clocked on a little bit more, because you might sort of think, that's a bit of a strange choice. Like, why is there two of them? Like, naturally, maybe one's good, one's bad, But yeah, I mean, obviously we kick off with this crime scene. And I got to say, I mean, I know we might have touched on it in the last one, I can't remember, but I just absolutely love the cinematography in this game. Like, the way it starts with, like, you as, like, a POV version of, like, Norman driving up the wheel, approaching the scene. Just, like, the sweeping camera angles you get, like, as it's pulling up. Like, I know it's something sounds like incredibly minor, but, like, when you compare it against other choice-based games, these things really stand out to me. And I just feel like the effort that Quantic Dream go into in their games, and more I'm starting to feel like that they're, bold statement, that they're starting to become like my favourite developer. Maybe there's a video there, like a Quantic Dream versus Supermassive game, like waiting to happen, because I feel like I'm just going to be praising so much throughout this entire series, mate.
Yeah, no, I do think actually that would be a really good shout for a video. It's one of those ones where supermassive games like deliver more games over time. But Quantic Dream, they're good because they don't let publishers rush them. But so when they release a gem, it is a banger. But you've got to wait like 5 years for it. And in this case, Detroit Become Human came out in 2018, and Eclipse won't come out till for another 2 or 3 years or something. So it's like, really? Oh, it's such a long wait. But oh well, that's what you get for wanting quality.
That's it. I've said it already, but I'll say it again. Like, I just wish that even like this, sort of like the Beyond Two Souls, I wish that these games were on Xbox, because I'd absolutely devour them. But yeah, obviously going into the scene itself, it's pretty basic stuff. But I mean, I was really enjoying it when I first played, because you see, obviously, when you see the dead body with the origami in the hand, you're thinking, oh, this is classic serial killer vibes. They're leaving a trophy from all the people that they've killed. You're meeting like these different characters, like the Blakes of this world, and just the different cops that are floating around the environment. And I was just having an absolute ball with it. I don't know what you were thinking on this scene, mate.
I really enjoyed it, and it introduces us to something which really sets Norman apart in terms of gameplay from the other characters, where he's got his ARI or his ARI glasses, right? And I just thought it was a really cool feature, really cool bit of tech. You probably see more things like this now, implemented in games. But I remember thinking back in 2010 that, wow, that's so groundbreaking. This guy has glasses where he can scan the floor. And it just, you find different clues, and things knocking around, whether it's a footprint, whether, rest in peace, but a dead cat on the train track. And it's just really cool that you can find stuff that other people might not. And, it really made me want to just search every inch of the crime scene, and then I was finding things on the floor, hidden in corners, that it just felt really gratifying. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed playing as Norman, and this scene, was just such a great way to kick him off.
Really like the visuals that they did as well. Like, even if as you're playing as Norman, you've got that pulsating radar thing, where you can find the clues, or even when you find them, and the way the camera pans around, and you've got all the writing coming up on screen. That was really cool. And you are right, it does set his chapters apart quite a lot from everybody else. But one thing I wanted to ask you, mate, as far as the evidence goes, is it critical that you find everything? Like, if you miss a certain bit of evidence, does that impact the plot in like even like a minor way later on?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it can, because like for example, someone might not go up the mud hill, which I always use as my example for why I love Quantic Dream's QTEs, because you've got the example where you've got to hold down different buttons. But you can get to the top of that mud hill and then find out, like, you know, different tire tracks and stuff, and that can give you a big clue to the potential vehicle that's used later in the game. You know, like when you look at like the body and afterwards you can go up to Blake and say, yeah, I'm good to leave. You can do that at any point, really. So yeah, I imagine people can miss out on a few clues, and it means that when Norman, which we'll talk about later on, when he does his like office scenes where, you know, he can like review his evidence, you might not get every part, which I think is cool, because it means that Norman might not get a good ending, or he might not be able to like help out at the very end. So yeah, it does actually play an effect. Like Heavy Rain, I think one of the criticisms you could probably argue is that it's possibly quite linear early doors. But there still are little choices like that, you know, like missing out on evidence, which will affect the long run. So it does show you that it is still a really sophisticated game, even for a game, you know, back in 2010.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I think you are right. It is linear, but like even as we spoke about in the last chapter, when you're playing as Ethan, you've got like the whole thing with Sean, like getting him his lunch, getting him his dinner. We literally discussed there's like multiple ways that can play out, and although it's not necessarily impacting the plot per se, it's still something different, you know. It's still something that if people got together and spoke about it afterwards, they'd be like, oh right, no, that's what happened for me. Like it still means that they're not being lazy. Like you could argue with other developers that like there are certain chapters, certain scenes, they are very much linear. There is no branching whatsoever, but like you couldn't necessarily level that at Quantic Dream. And yeah, like it seems very similar here at the crime scene. I know you touched on as well about like the mud hill bit. Yeah, we've like spoke about this to death, but again, really like it. And even the fact on the way down as well, like I'm guessing that if you fail the QTEs coming back down the hill, that he like lands on his ass or something.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure like his outfit can muddy up as well, and you can be walking around with a muddy, you know, outfit, which I find pretty cool.
Okay, so rocking on from here, obviously we go back to Ethan, who is having a therapy session, a nice little scene. A couple of questions that I wanted to put to you, mate, is basically like, you have the choices, don't you, like the ink blot test at the start.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do you know if like, depending on what you choose, that you know, brings about different dialogue with the therapist, or dare I say, like it carries slightly further forward into the plot at all?
I actually don't know, and it's a very good question, because I think like I picked like crab, death. I think I picked like a crow or something. And yeah, like I don't actually know if that has an effect, but yeah, that would be really good to find out.
I know when I saw your live stream, you did say that, like, depending on what you say to the actual therapist towards the end of the scene, that, you know, I think if you mentioned about the blackouts, isn't it? I think if you bring that up, he can then, like, you know, screw you over and basically snitch to the police or something like that.
He does, yeah. So like you wouldn't know it at this point when you blind play it, but yeah, like this guy comes back later in the game when he's interrogated by cops. So, you know, as early as this scene, you're just talking to your shrink, and you don't realise that conversation, like, you know, the whole patient-doctor confidentiality thing's gonna go right out the fucking window. Shame on the guy. But yeah, like it does, which is cool, you know. So like you just having this little therapy session, and yeah, that can have an effect. One thing that I noticed when I like played the scene is like, you know, Ethan's got different dialogue options, like how to respond to the therapist. And there was one point where he was like, "How are you feeling?" And I was like, "Oh, there's an option to say depressed. I guess I'll pick that, you know, because like, you know, I've lost one son and I live in my awful flat with the other one, you know, who's moody when I send him to bed early." And I just said, "Yeah, oh yeah, I'm a little depressed, I guess." And hitting the word depressed, and I spoke in the last episode when, you know, I was Scott, and I picked the word compassionate, and then he ended up saying, "Oh, I know what you're going through." And I was like, "Scott, that is not compassionate. Why would you say that?" The same sort of thing happened. I said, "Oh yeah, I guess I'm depressed." And then Ethan just says like, "Oh, I no longer want to live." And I was like, "Oh, whoa, like I get depressed, you know, it's kind of like, you know, leads to that." But I just was like, "Oh, damn, I just wanted to say I was a little depressed." And Ethan's just out here saying, "Yeah, I want to die." I was like, "Damn, I didn't mean to say that either."
Yeah, it's like not all depressed people want to kill themselves, but yeah,
Exactly.
again, like you mentioned, yeah, it's like another one of those examples of just the dialogue not going how you want to. But I mean, yeah, it's a nice little scene. I mean, again, there's not too much to cover. I mean, as I've said already, you get the moments where like there's the split screen, like as you're talking to him and you can walk around, you get the different camera angles. But I've already said that that's absolutely brilliant feature. So we're going to rock on to the next chapter called The Park, where of course Ethan and Sean are out for a little fun day out together. Well, we was hoping it would be a fun day out together. Of course, we all know it does go wrong. And I mean, yeah, have you got any general thoughts on this particular scene, mate? What did you get up to?
Yeah, just did stuff like the seesaw, the swing, the merry-go-round. You can buy the kids some strawberry candies, and he's like, "No, I hate strawberry." And I was like, "Really, kid? Like, like why would you be like that?"
But yeah, that's so true. I can't remember about the strawberries. Is that the only thing you can buy, or do you have a choice of something else you can buy?
I can't remember if there's another choice, but I know like I got a trophy for it, so I was like, you might not appreciate it, but I got a trophy, so screw you, you ungrateful son.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, good friends. You got to play 2 games with him, which yeah, you did, didn't you? You did the seesaw and the swings, and then you bought him some candy. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, obviously, we know where this goes. Ethan has another blackout, and I mean, a little minor pick here, like. Can I just say as well that I just find it a little bit odd that, you know, this guy is clearly tripping. He's having a blackout. Like, there's adults in the park, kids running around, and no one notices or no one does anything. The fact that this guy's just stumbling around in the middle of the street for hours, like, this boy's gone. Like, no one's thought, oh, yeah, like, this is, you know, his son. Let's look after him for the meantime. Like, everyone just sods off. But then, obviously, minor nitpick over. He then runs back later, doesn't he? He's screaming out Sean, which for me doesn't have the same ring to it as Jason, just personal preference. Like Jason is like the iconic line here. So he blacks out, and then you have this QTE, don't you, where you have to like dodge the truck. And I was just thinking to myself, could you imagine like if that actually followed through and like you could get Ethan killed? Almost like Kara could die very early doors in Detroit Become Human. Like, damn, it would be like the harshest QTE ever, but in a way it keeps you on your toes because that's the thing, like they can pop up at any time. So yeah, of course Ethan has now lost both of his sons, but we then rock on back to Norman, who's having his first day with the police. And mate, I'm going to bring you this scene. It did make me laugh when I watched your playthrough of it, so I want you to like take the lead on this. But the fella that's taking you round struggles to do his tie, and I just wanted your like commentary on that whole bit.
He asked me to tie his tie, and I was laughing at him like, what adult doesn't have to tie his tie? And then for some reason I kept failing the quick time events, so like I didn't do it anyway, and then he gave up like on me doing it for him because I just couldn't do it. Like I couldn't do the QTE. So he ended up saying, oh, I'll tie it myself, and then he like went off like really angry at me. And I was just like, if you could do it yourself, why did you need me to do it? Like some kind of power move. But yeah, hated that character from early doors, to be honest, lad.
Yeah, and if I remember right, I might be wrong in saying this, but when, you know, skipping way forward in this plot, when later on it's established that it was like a cop that was responsible for, you know, murders and stuff, I did think Blake, but I immediately thought this guy, and I just find it funny if like these origami killers, just like there's some guy that can't do his own tie. But yeah, it's just like, it sort of sticks out, almost like in The Wolf Among Us, how you just got like the ginger guy, it's like Heavy Rain, it's like this guy. But yeah, I mean, we stick with Norman. The other guy sods off and does his media conference thing, and we get to play around with the ARI, with Norman. Some really fun things here. Obviously the main purpose of it is to look through the evidence and, you know, see where the orchids are and all the tyre tracks and stuff like that. But you get to choose your own background, don't you? I mean, I can't remember what they were, mate. Was it one was on Mars, one was underwater?
Yeah, one's in the mountains, and then one is like one's like in a forest.
Oh, that's right, yeah. So again, it's not anything major, but it's just a nice little thing that it gives the player the ability to sort of personalise their own experience when they're in the zone with Jaden. But yeah, we then obviously move on to then see Ethan come in. I think this is the first moment where two of the playable characters come together. And obviously you then are asking Ethan, or Blake is asking Ethan these questions. And again, this is something I'm going to put to you, mate. Obviously the answers you give, are they important to the plot? Like when he asks, you know, what time you was in the park, what Sean was wearing. Again, does it have any sort of semblance on the plot? Like, do they suspect you more if it's, you know, if you give wrong answers or something?
Honestly, I can't actually think of a reason why it would, so I think it might be a bit of a red herring thing. But obviously, you know, if you are a trophy hunter, it can help you get a trophy. So, and it is just one of those cool, just like observation exercise puzzles as well. Because I think on my blind playthrough, or actually, I mean, I didn't have a blind playthrough. Like, when I first watched someone play it, I think I got all the questions right, so it did feel really rewarding. Like, oh yeah, I paid attention to what time it was. I remembered what outfit he was wearing. So it's just kind of like maybe one of those little satisfying things for, you know, on that front.
I got it. I was sort of playing along as I watched yours, and I remembered the time. I remembered the fact he was wearing like a beigey coloured jacket, but I can't remember like what the colour of the trousers were. But I think you said on the stream that all the answers were like number one anyway, so it sort of like explains itself as to, you know, what one to pick. But I don't know if you wanted to touch on the character of Blake now, mate, because one thing I picked up from this scene in particular is just how abrupt he was to Ethan. Like when Ethan was asking them, like, oh, you know, can you tell me more, like sort of like what's going on? It might be the origami killer, and Blake just turns around and goes, well, if it is the origami killer, he's got about 3 or 4 days to live, and then just walks off. And obviously we met him earlier on at the crime scene, so I don't know, is there anything you wanted to touch on Blake?
Yeah, I mean, like, you can also say, oh, do you reckon it's the origami killer? And he's like, nah, he'd probably just run off. And I'm just like, what a shitty cop. And like, don't get me wrong, I love Quantic Dream, but like we saw it with Detroit Become Human, but they need to stop adding a one-dimensional cop who is just, his only ploy is to just despite you and go against everything you say. We had Gavin in Detroit Become Human. Luckily, he wasn't your sidekick like he is in Heavy Rain. We had Hank, who's a really well-written character. But then we have Blake in this one. It's interesting that different games, like they kind of have like one you play as the FBI and you're stepping on the toes of the cops, and one you're like, you know, sort of playing as the cops, and then at one point the FBI can come in and take over a scene. So it is cool how they flip the perspectives there. But I don't know, like, I just look at Blake and Gavin, and whenever they open their mouth, I kind of yawn. We sort of spoke about it in The Wolf Among Us, how you had a character like Bluebird. It is nice to have a bit of opposition to the main character, don't get me wrong. But sometimes I feel like they need a bit more depth than just being a complete arsehole, if that makes sense.
I think so, but like, all the same, I'm glad that he was there, because I feel like Norman is quite a bland, I don't know if he's controversial, but I think he's quite a bland character anyway. So I'm glad that you've got someone like Blake there that is a bit of an antagonist, that is sort of a little bit less PC, a little, you know, he just says what he thinks, he's not got a filter. Because I do actually hold the Norman scenes quite highly, and a part of me does think that Blake comes into it because of that. I think he just gives that sort of opposing view nice and often. He can actually really up the tension.
Yeah, I mean, Norman actually tends to be most people's favourite character, but I feel with Heavy Rain, a big part of it is less about the characters, more about the scenes they're in. Like, I really like Ethan, but I would praise it more down to like the trials rather than Ethan himself.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I'm honestly in agreement, mate. So honestly, moving on from here, because Ethan and Grace, they sort of get together, they talk about what's happening and stuff. I'm going to come back to the music, because just the way they do it, again, coupled with like the cinematography, but like the way they sort of sell the emotion with like the fact that another child is lost, and even like the little details where like Grace is like crying, and you can see that Ethan wants to go and hug her, but then he like stops himself, and then she turns her back on him and like cries. It's just, again, it's a brilliant like show versus tell moment. You know, it's just a great way of sort of saying of like where their relationship is at. And you've got the piano in the background. I know that they use the piano quite a lot through this game, it just sells the emotion really well, and I just feel like it was worthy of like mentioning that.
One thing I wanted to discuss, mate, which doesn't really fit anywhere specifically, it's just a thing throughout the whole game, but it's the accents. So we had it from the Shrink, we have it from Norman, you have it from any of the kid actors in the game, such as Sean and like, you know, the flashback characters, which we'll see later on. But because Quantic Dream are French Canadian, the accents have French tones in them, a bit of dialect. And the game's supposed to be set in Philadelphia, and it is one of the criticisms I do see thrown at this game. But would you say that any of the accents off-put you a little bit? That like it's supposed to be set in USA, and the accents don't quite belong in the game?
I'm going to be honest, I didn't really notice it that much. I know it's one of them things where, like, obviously maybe it sticks out more to other people that, you know, like, from the areas in question. But to me as a player, no, I got to admit I didn't really notice it, mate. So when I saw the point come up, I was like listening out for it. But again, there's maybe like the odd line where you can like notice a sort of a slight inflection, like the sort of the accent changes and that. But on the whole, like I wasn't really listening out for it.
Nah, very well. Well, obviously, guys, let us know in the comments if it off-put you and if you notice the accents.
Okay, right, so we're now going to move on to the final chapter that we're going to talk in this analysis episode. And for me, again, a very iconic chapter, and that is Hassan's shop. So we're back with Scott Shelby, and he's trying to find a little bit more. He's trying to get more boxes, more evidence, take his way in order to, in big speech marks, solve this crime. I mean, mate, what do you think on this scene as a whole?
Yeah, it's a fun little scene. It's cool to get back into Scott, see him in a different light again, where, you know, he's doing his PI work and stuff. Obviously, guys, like, you know, there's spoilers in this video, so turn away. But you know, like, there are little kind of tidbits in there, like you look back at the fact that Scott's collecting a shoebox, and it's sort of for all the reasons you don't think, which I think's really clever. Like, I think this is what Scott's scenes need to be more heavy on. And it is quite sad, actually, where Hassan, sort of as you leave the shop at the very end of the chapter, says, oh yeah, I was starting to think there was no good left in the world. And it does actually make my heart like a little bit more sad when Hassan, you know, like if he was to see the news at the end of the game, it'd be like, oh, Hassan, you poor soul, mate. But yeah, no, really interesting. It's really tense again. You know, it does the thing where it plays with the camera angles. I like the little whole gameplay element of, like, obviously we know the robber comes in, and you know you've got to kind of sneak up on him, and you've got to avoid the aisle that has the crisps on it. So that, you know, there's like a little kind of gameplay like barrier in there like that, which I found really cool. I'm sure, Jack, as you saw my stream, you would have seen that Felici, one of our fans, encouraged me in the chat to actually lose the negotiation and get shot. And I was all for it, because I hadn't seen what happens when you do that. So that was like really interesting, because I'd only ever succeeded at it before. I did think it was a bit like the robber in question who comes in is a bit stupid, because you're like, oh, what's your name? And he's like, oh, it's Andrew. It's like, well done, you've just given your name away to like a PI and stuff. And then he's confirmed, like, oh yeah, I've got a daughter. It's like, what are you doing, mate? Like, if you're robbing the store, just go in and out. I'm not a robber myself, but I imagine like I would do a way better job than this guy. But yeah, honestly, really enjoyable scene. When I think Heavy Rain, this might be one of the more iconic scenes that come to my brain, lad.
It certainly is it is for me anyway. I'm looking at the trophies here, and again, I'm like amazed at like the branching. So you've got the one, it's called Negotiator, where you talk Andrew into leaving, and then you've got one here, Perfect Crime, letting Hassan die is a requirement for this trophy, and I didn't know that he could die. So that's like complete brand, you know, this is brand new information for me. And it basically says that, like, I think if you just stay at the back of the shop, that's essentially what can happen. You can then just shoot him and then leave. Other things here I've got as well. It says Scott can tell Hassan that he lost someone he loved, foreshadowing the later chapter Hold by Hand, where he loses his brother. And I've got to admit, that is something that I thought of when I listened back to this. And this is really interesting, mate. I really like this one. So if Scott chooses the save Sean option while talking to Hassan, he says that the killer has kidnapped another victim, a 10-year-old boy. However, the police have yet to announce Sean's disappearance and dismiss the possibility that the origami killer was responsible when Ethan first reported it. And because Scott hasn't been in direct contact with Ethan since it happened, it makes it extremely likely that Scott would know the killer himself. He would know that the killer had kidnapped Sean unless he was personally involved.
Yeah, that is cool, and it makes you think, like, if at any point anyone sussed it was Scott, it'll be interesting to find if anyone got it from that moment.
Yeah, because even when he's talking to Lauren, like in part 1, I swear that when you were talking about the whole compassionate argument thing, like when she says, "Oh, you don't know what it's like to lose someone," and then he sort of goes, "Oh, I know how you feel." It's sort of like a similar thing here, isn't it? Because he says that, and I'm guessing he's referring to his brother. But then we get a more overt reference to it in this one, where he says, "Yeah, like I know exactly what it is to like lose someone." So like, probably very intentional, but the fact that there's like this sort of like level of detail like hidden, like even in the early stages of the game, I absolutely love that.
It's quite clever, isn't it? Because it's like, this is your second chapter with Scott, so you probably just think this is them drawing out his character, giving him a bit of depth. But like, when you look at the bigger picture, it's so interesting to see they've weaved that in there.
It really is, yeah. And then obviously like going beyond that, like I said before, like you can then have like the variations in terms of like whether Hassan lives or dies. So obviously the ways that he can die is if you, like I say, wait at the back of the store, you fail to negotiate with Andrew, and there's another one, cause too much noise. And I'm like, what? Like, what does that even mean? I'm pretty sure, isn't there an aisle where there's like stuff on the floor? Is it something to do with that?
Yeah, there's like loads of like emptied like crisps on the floor, or chips for our American audience. But yeah, what's interesting as well is like, it's everywhere. It's such a mess. And when you go in the shop, Hassan's just behind the counter. You'd think that if there was no customers in there, you'd probably clean that up. So yeah, like we've said, Ethan's a lousy father in reflection. Another thing, I think Hassan's a pretty lousy shop owner, to be honest.
He deserves to die because of that one.
Exactly.
But yeah, and that's where we're gonna wrap it up, guys. So that was analysis 2 for Heavy Rain. Do leave your comments in the comments below. What do you think of these scenes in this particular episode? What your choices were, if you could remember. We know they're pretty linear at this point, but as we discussed, there are little sub choices to note. And yeah, is there anything you wanted to add, mate?
Nah, guys, just join us for next Sunday, where Ethan opens a shoebox, will bully a religious person, and I'm pretty sure we'll meet our next character, Madison Page, for the first time. So yeah, tune in to get our thoughts on that one.
Madison has a dream. Yeah. All right, guys. Catch you later.
See you guys. Take care.